War Chief Vexmore stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the Zilani homeworld burn below. The massive Korthak dreadnought hung in space like a metal mountain, its weapons continuously firing at the planet's surface. Smoke and fire covered most of the continents where peaceful cities once stood. The war chief was pleased with his progress. The Zilani had lasted longer than most species, but they were finally broken. Their pathetic defense fleet had been destroyed in the first week. Now his forces bombarded their world at leisure, taking time to savor the destruction. Captain Ben Torres led the human reconnaissance team that had been watching the Korthak siege for 3 days. His stealth ship floated invisible among the asteroids at the edge of the system. The sight of burning cities filled every human crew member with cold rage. The Korthak fleet was arranged in their traditional formation around the planet. 12 massive dreadnoughts formed a ring while smaller ships patrolled the outer system. It was a formation designed to intimidate enemies and display the Empire's overwhelming power. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan studied the enemy ships through her scanner equipment. The Korthak vessels were impressive, but they followed predictable patterns. Their commanders had grown lazy after centuries of easy victories. They posted guards but did not really expect anyone to challenge them. Admiral Susan Blake received the reconnaissance reports aboard the UEFS Vengeance. The human fleet had dropped out of hyperspace at the very edge of the system, where sensors could not detect them. Every ship was running silent while they prepared for the most important battle in human history. War Chief Vexmore noticed new contacts appearing on his sensors. Several small ships had emerged from hyperspace and were approaching his position. The war chief smiled with anticipation. Another rescue attempt by some foolish species who thought they could save the Zilani. Commander Rick Torres led the first wave of human fighters toward the Korthak fleet. His 20 ships flew in loose formation, appearing to be another desperate attempt to break the siege. The enemy would expect them to charge bravely forward and die gloriously like all the others. The Korthak opened communications as they always did before destroying rescue fleets. Vexmore's image appeared on screens throughout the approaching human ships. The alien war chief was massive and covered in battle scars. His voice boomed with arrogant confidence. He told the humans that their species was unknown to him, but their fate was already decided. The Korthak Empire had destroyed hundreds of rescue fleets over the centuries. These newcomers would join the wreckage floating around the Zilani system. Captain Jake Morrison responded from his command ship. His voice was calm and polite as he thanked the war chief for the warning. Then he said something that made every Korthak warrior pause in confusion. The humans had not come to rescue the Zilani. They had come to deliver a message. Vexmore demanded to know what message primitive Deathworld savages could possibly have for the mighty Korthak Empire. Morrison's answer was simple and direct. The message was that bullies who hurt innocent people always met the same fate when they encountered Earth's children. The war chief laughed at the threat from such a small force. 20 human ships against 12 Korthak dreadnoughts was not even a fair fight. He gave the order for his fleet to destroy the impudent mammals and return to bombing the planet below. That was when Lieutenant Sullivan's sabotage team struck from inside the Korthak formation. For 3 days, human stealth ships had been infiltrating the enemy fleet. Invisible to sensors, they had attached explosive charges to critical systems on every major vessel. The war chief's laughter died as explosions erupted throughout his flagship. The massive dreadnought shuddered as its engine core destabilized. Similar explosions tore through. The other Korthak ships, as human saboteurs, triggered their carefully placed bombs. Sergeant Tony Garcia led his Marines aboard the Korthak. Prison ship holding captured Zilani civilians. The aliens' guards were caught completely off guard by humans appearing in their most secure sections. The fight was brief and brutal, as Earth's predators showed why they ruled their death world. Major Danny Clark coordinated the rescue operation while human fighters engaged the confused Korthak fleet. Enemy ships fired wildly in all directions, trying to hit opponents they could not see clearly. The rigid formation that had once displayed their power now trapped them like targets in a shooting gallery. War Chief Vexmore tried to rally his forces, but the attacks were coming from everywhere at once. His sensors showed enemy contacts inside his own formation, outside his defensive perimeter, and somehow even aboard his ships. Nothing in 1,000 years of conquest had prepared the Korthak for this kind of warfare. Captain Torres pressed his attack on the damaged flagship, while more human ships emerged from hyperspace. The UEFS Vengeance and the main battle fleet arrived just as the enemy formation began to collapse. Admiral Blake had timed the assault perfectly. The Korthak tried to regroup, but they were fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. Human ships attacked from multiple directions using tactics no honorable species would consider. They targeted engines instead of weapons, rescued prisoners instead of conquering territory, and used the enemy's own formation against them. Dr. Amy Parker monitored the battle from the Vengeance's medical bay, where she prepared to treat rescued Zilani civilians. The prison ships contained thousands of innocent people who had been tortured for the amusement of their captors. Each rescued alien reminded the humans why they were fighting. Vexmore's flagship began breaking apart as its damaged systems failed one by one. The war chief sent a final message to the Korthak High Command before his ship exploded. His warning was brief but urgent. These humans did not fight like any species the Empire had encountered. They fought to win regardless of honor or tradition. Lieutenant Sullivan watched the massive dreadnought come apart in a chain of explosions that lit up the system. The sight was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The ship that had been bombarding innocent civilians was now scattered wreckage floating in space. The remaining Korthak ships tried to retreat, but human forces had anticipated this move. Captain Steve Williams led his stealth squadron in attacks on enemy engines, stranding the survivors in the system. None of them would escape to warn the Empire about humanity's true capabilities. Within 6 hours of the first attack, the entire Korthak siege fleet had been destroyed or captured. The burning cities on the Zilani homeworld began to see sunlight again as the smoke cleared. Rescue ships from the human fleet headed down to the surface to help survivors. Admiral Blake stood on her command deck, watching the aftermath of humanity's first victory against the Korthak Empire. The battle had been won through tactics that would shock the civilized galaxy. But sometimes civilization required good people to become monsters in defense of the innocent. War Chief Vexmore's final transmission reached the Korthak High Command 3 days later. The message sent waves of fear through an empire that had not known defeat in over a millennium. The humans had announced their presence in the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible by destroying an entire siege fleet without losing a single ship. The Zilani people cheered as human Marines walked through their liberated cities. These strange mammals from a death world had done the impossible. They had faced the mighty Korthak Empire and emerged victorious through courage, cunning, and the absolute refusal to let innocent people suffer while they had the power to help. Admiral Susan Blake stood on the command deck of the UEFS Vengeance, watching Earth's greatest military force prepare for war. The massive battleship was humanity's newest and most powerful vessel. Its dark hull bristled with weapons that had been tested in the brutal conflicts of Earth's history. Captain Jake Morrison had returned from the Galactic Council with orders that sent shockwaves through Earth's military command. Within 6 hours of his report, every major military base on the planet was buzzing with activity. Soldiers who had been on leave were recalled immediately. Ships that were undergoing repairs were rushed back into service. General Carl Davis walked through the war room where hundreds of officers planned the largest military operation in human history. Digital displays showed star maps of Korthak territory. Intelligence reports flooded in from human agents who had been secretly watching the Empire for years. Colonel Ryan Mitchell gathered his best Marines in the briefing hall of Luna Base. These were veterans of Earth's deadliest conflicts. They had fought in the Amazon Wars, survived the Arctic campaigns, and earned their ranks in battles that would have killed soldiers from peaceful worlds. Each Marine had been shaped by humanity's violent history. The colonel explained their mission with simple words. The Korthak Empire had been bullying peaceful species for over 1,000 years. They tortured prisoners and destroyed entire civilizations for entertainment. Now they were threatening the Zilani people who had done nothing wrong except ask for help. Sergeant Tony Garcia raised his hand to ask a question. He wanted to know why humans should risk their lives for aliens they had never met. Mitchell's answer was direct and honest. Humans protected innocent people because that was what separated them from monsters like the Korthak. Dr. Amy Parker worked day and night in her laboratory studying everything known about Korthak biology. The Empire's warriors were large and strong, but they had evolved on a world with low gravity and no major predators. Their bodies were built for intimidation, not for real combat against Earth's apex predators. Her research revealed interesting weaknesses in Korthak psychology. They had won every war through overwhelming force and psychological terror. No species had ever fought back effectively because most galactic civilizations were too civilized to use dirty tactics. Captain Steve Williams prepared his stealth reconnaissance ships for the most dangerous mission of his career. His vessels would slip deep into Korthak space to gather intelligence and mark targets. The ships used Earth-developed cloaking technology that was decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen. His pilots were chosen from Earth's best fighter squadrons. They had trained in the asteroid belts and survived mock battles in the radiation storms of Jupiter's moons. Each pilot understood that their mission would determine whether the human fleet lived or died. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan ran final checks on her bomber squadron's equipment. Her ships carried experimental weapons designed specifically for this mission. The bombs were small but incredibly destructive, designed to be planted inside enemy vessels by sabotage teams. Admiral Blake called a meeting of all senior officers aboard the Vengeance. The conference room was packed with humanity's finest military minds. These were people who had studied every major conflict in human history and learned from both victories and defeats. The Admiral explained the strategic situation with brutal honesty. The Korthak Empire controlled over 200 star systems. Their fleet consisted of massive dreadnoughts that could destroy entire cities with single shots. Every previous enemy had tried to fight them in direct combat and failed. Commander Rick Torres suggested a different approach. Humans had learned warfare in Earth's most dangerous environments. They understood concepts that peaceful aliens could not imagine: ambush tactics, psychological warfare, and the art of making enemies afraid of the dark. General Davis outlined the battle plan that would shock the galaxy. Instead of challenging the Korthak to honorable combat, human forces would strike like predators hunting prey. They would use deception, sabotage, and terror to destroy an empire that had grown fat and lazy on easy victories. The plan called for multiple phases of attack. First, reconnaissance teams would map Korthak defenses and identify key targets. Then sabotage units would infiltrate enemy positions and plant explosives. Finally, the main fleet would attack when the enemy was confused and damaged. Major Danny Clark volunteered to lead the most dangerous part of the mission. His Special Forces team would land on Korthak prison ships to rescue captured Zilani civilians. The operation would require perfect timing and absolute courage, because there would be no backup if things went wrong. Dr. Parker presented her analysis of Korthak military doctrine. The Empire's commanders followed rigid patterns that had worked for centuries. They announced their intentions, gave enemies time to surrender, and then attacked with massive force. They had never faced an opponent who ignored the rules of civilized warfare. Captain Morrison studied reports from the Zilani system, where Korthak forces were currently conducting their siege. The enemy had positioned their ships in a classic formation that left them vulnerable to attacks from unexpected directions. They were so confident in their superiority that they had not even bothered with proper defensive screens. Admiral Blake gave the final orders that would launch humanity's first interstellar war. 50 ships would accompany the Vengeance to Zilani space. Each vessel carried warriors who had been forged in the crucible of Earth's endless conflicts. They were humanity's answer to a galaxy that had forgotten how to fight for what was right. As the fleet prepared to enter hyperspace, messages of support arrived from across Earth. Families of soldiers sent their blessings. Scientists offered new weapons and equipment. Even former enemies of humanity wished the fleet success in their mission to protect innocent life. The UEFS Vengeance led the human armada into the star tunnel that would carry them to their destiny. Behind them, Earth continued its preparations for war. Factories worked around the clock building new ships and weapons. Training camps prepared fresh soldiers for the battles to come. Colonel Mitchell addressed his Marines one final time before they entered suspended animation for the long journey. He reminded them that they were not just fighting for the Zilani people. They were fighting to show the galaxy that bullies could be stopped and that innocent life was worth protecting. The human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying the hopes and fury of an entire world. In 2 weeks, they would reach Zilani space, where the Korthak Empire waited in ignorant confidence. The galaxy's greatest predators were about to meet the children of Earth's death world. Admiral Blake stood alone on the command deck, watching the stars streak past. She knew that humanity was taking an enormous risk by challenging such a powerful empire, but she also knew that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. The Korthak were about to learn what happened when someone threatened innocent people in the presence of Earth's protectors. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with worried voices. Hundreds of alien species had gathered for an emergency meeting. Their colorful forms filled the massive chamber that floated in space between three suns. Ambassador Zethka of the Zilani people stood at the center podium, his blue skin pale with fear. Jake Morrison sat in the human section with his small team. The other species barely looked at them. Humans were new to the galaxy and most aliens thought they were weak. Earth was known as a death world, a planet so dangerous that nothing good could come from it. The other races whispered that humans were primitive and violent. Zethka began to speak. His voice shook as he told the council about his people's suffering. The Korthak Empire had come to their world 3 months ago. The Korthak were a race of warriors who conquered planets for fun. They had destroyed 17 peaceful worlds in the past year alone. The Zilani had tried to fight back, but they were not warriors. They were scientists and artists who had never known war. Their world was beautiful and peaceful. They had created amazing technology, but none of it was made for fighting. The Korthak ships surrounded their planet and bombed their cities every day. Lisa Bennett, the human intelligence officer, listened carefully. She took notes on everything Zethka said. The Korthak Empire was huge and powerful. They had been conquering worlds for over 1,000 years. No one had ever beaten them in a real fight. General Carl Davis leaned forward in his chair. He was an old soldier who had fought in many wars on Earth. His gray hair and scars told stories of battles won and lost. He understood what real war meant. Zethka continued his plea. The Zilani had asked every major power in the galaxy for help. The Altarians said they were too busy with trade. The Vorthan Republic claimed they needed to protect their own borders. The Crystal Collective simply refused to answer their calls. The Korthak were led by brutal war chiefs who enjoyed causing pain. They did not just want to rule the galaxy, they wanted to make everyone suffer. Captured prisoners were tortured for entertainment. Entire cities were destroyed just to send a message. Captain Steve Williams whispered to his teammate. The Korthak tactics were simple but effective. They would surround a world with massive ships and demand surrender. If the planet refused, they would bomb it until nothing was left alive. Most worlds gave up without fighting. The Galactic Council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone knew about the Korthak threat, but no one wanted to face them. The Empire's military was too strong and their leaders were too cruel. Fighting them meant certain death for any species that tried. Zethka's voice grew desperate. His people were dying every day. The Korthak had captured his daughter and thousands of other Zilani children. They were being held as slaves on prison ships. The bombing continued day and night. Soon there would be no Zilani left alive. Ambassador Chen of the Altarians stood up. She spoke in a cold voice about practical matters. The Korthak Empire was too powerful to fight. Any species that tried to help the Zilani would only bring destruction upon themselves. It was better to stay neutral and hope the Korthak would be satisfied with conquering just a few more worlds. The Crystal Collective's representative agreed. Their crystalline forms sparkled as they spoke about the need for calm thinking. War with the Korthak would only lead to more death. Perhaps the Zilani could negotiate some kind of peace treaty. Zethka's eyes filled with tears. He had traveled across the galaxy begging for help. Every powerful race had refused him. His people were going to die and no one cared enough to try saving them. Jake Morrison stood up slowly. The entire council chamber fell silent. Humans rarely spoke at these meetings. Most aliens expected them to stay quiet and listen to their betters. Jake's voice was calm but strong as he addressed the council. He said that humans understood what the Korthak were doing. Earth had seen many wars and many tyrants. Bullies who hurt innocent people for pleasure were nothing new. The difference was that humans had learned how to fight back against such monsters. Lisa Bennett opened her datapad and shared what human intelligence had learned about the Korthak. Their empire was big, but their tactics were simple. They relied on fear and overwhelming force. No one had ever tried to fight them using guerrilla warfare or surprise attacks. General Davis stepped forward. His weathered face was serious as he looked at the alien ambassadors. He told them that humanity would help the Zilani people. Earth would send ships and soldiers to fight the Korthak Empire. The council chamber erupted in shocked voices. Many aliens laughed at the idea. Humans were from a death world with primitive technology. How could they possibly fight an empire that had conquered half the galaxy? Dr. Amy Parker, the human scientist, stood up next. She explained that being from a death world was actually an advantage. Humans had evolved to survive in the most dangerous environment known to the galaxy. They understood violence in ways that peaceful species could not. Captain Morrison looked directly at Zethka. He promised that human forces would reach Zilani space within 2 weeks. They would not just defend the planet. They would hunt down every Korthak ship and free every prisoner. The Empire had made a mistake by threatening innocent people in the presence of Earth's children. The Altarian ambassador warned that humanity was making a terrible mistake. The Korthak would destroy human colonies in revenge. Earth itself might be attacked. Was saving one alien species worth risking human civilization? General Davis smiled coldly. He explained that humans had a simple rule about bullies. When someone hurts innocent people, you hurt them back harder. The Korthak had been terrorizing the galaxy for too long. It was time someone taught them what real fear felt like. Zethka collapsed to his knees in relief. After months of rejection and despair, someone had finally agreed to help his people. He did not understand why these strange mammals from a death world would risk everything for aliens they barely knew. Jake Morrison helped the Zilani ambassador to his feet. He told Zethka that humans protected those who could not protect themselves. It was just who they were. The Korthak Empire was about to learn why Earth was called a death world, and why its children were the most dangerous. Predators in the galaxy. The Council. Meeting ended with most aliens shaking their heads in disbelief. They expected to attend humanity's funeral within a month. None of them understood that they had just witnessed the beginning of the Korthak Empire's worst nightmare. High Commander Zach Wren received the impossible news in his fortress on the Korthak homeworld. War Chief Vexmore was dead, and his entire siege fleet had been destroyed by an unknown species called humans. The report made no sense because no race had ever defeated the Korthak in direct combat. The High Commander studied the tactical data from the battle with growing alarm. These humans had used fighting methods that violated every civilized rule of warfare. They attacked from ambush, used deception and sabotage, and showed no respect for the honorable traditions that governed galactic conflict. Captain Beth Rogers led the human fleet in a series of lightning raids across 3 Korthak star systems. Her ships would appear without warning, destroy military targets, and disappear before enemy reinforcements could arrive. The raids followed no predictable pattern that Korthak commanders could anticipate. Major Danny Clark established hidden bases on liberated worlds where human engineers worked with grateful alien populations. The partnership between human tactical knowledge and alien technology created innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. Weapons and ships improved with every passing week, Admiral. Susan Blake coordinated the overall campaign from her flagship while human intelligence gathered information about Korthak prison worlds throughout the Empire. Each captured facility revealed new horrors that strengthened humanity's resolve to end the Empire's reign of terror. Zakran mobilized 3 full battle fleets to hunt down and destroy the human threat before it could inspire other species to rebel. The largest military force in Korthak history assembled at their primary naval base. Over 300 ships prepared to teach these Death World savages their proper place. Sergeant Tony Garcia led rescue operations on a dozen prison worlds where the Korthak kept slaves from conquered civilizations. The sight of torture chambers and mass graves awakened something primal in human soldiers. Their ancestors had fought to protect their tribes on prehistoric Earth, and that protective fury still burned in their hearts. The liberated alien populations looked at their human rescuers with wonder and growing hope. For centuries they had believed the Korthak were invincible. Now mammals from a death world had proven that the Empire could be defeated by those willing to fight without mercy. Commander Rick Torres pioneered new tactics that drove Korthak forces to distraction. Human ships would appear to retreat when faced with superior numbers, then circle back to attack supply convoys and support vessels. Every time the enemy concentrated their forces, another target would be struck on the opposite side of their territory. Dr. Amy Parker worked with alien scientists to understand the psychological impact of human warfare on Korthak society. The Empire's warriors had never experienced fear in combat before. Now they jumped at shadows and reported phantom attacks that existed only in their terrified imagination. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan led bombing raids deep into Korthak space using routes that enemy strategists thought were impossible. Her pilots had learned to navigate through asteroid fields and radiation storms that would destroy conventional aircraft. The galaxy's most dangerous flying conditions were just another training exercise for pilots from Earth. High Commander Zach Wren launched his massive counterattack with supreme confidence. 300 ships represented more firepower than most species had ever seen in one place. The humans would be crushed by overwhelming force just like every other enemy in Korthak history. Captain Jake Morrison anticipated the enemy response and prepared humanity's greatest deception operation. False intelligence suggested that the main human fleet was hiding in the Epsilon sector, preparing for a major assault. Korthak forces rushed to intercept the phantom threat while the real attack came from 3 other directions. Colonel Ryan Mitchell's Marines spearheaded ground invasions of Korthak military bases using tactics that shocked alien observers. They attacked at night, used camouflage and stealth, and showed no hesitation about fighting dirty when innocent lives were at stake. Honor meant nothing when children were being tortured in enemy camps. The first Korthak battle fleet reached the Epsilon sector and found nothing but empty space and sensor decoys. While they searched for an enemy that was not there, human forces struck their home bases and supply depots. Entire logistics networks collapsed as Earth's predators hunted their prey. Zach Wren realized too late that his forces had been outmaneuvered by opponents who thought like hunters rather than warriors. The humans had turned the Korthak's own size and strength against them by making them chase shadows while real targets burned behind their lines. Captain Steve Williams led stealth attacks on Korthak, communication networks isolating enemy fleets and preventing coordinated responses. Without reliable information, the Empire's commanders made desperate decisions based on fear and incomplete intelligence. The second and third Korthak battle fleets suffered similar fates as human forces struck with precision and vanished before enemy reinforcements could respond. Ship after ship disappeared into the darkness of space, destroyed by enemies they never saw coming. Major Clark supervised the evacuation of civilian populations from war zones, while human medical teams treated refugees from dozens of liberated worlds. The galaxy watched in amazement as Deathworld savages showed more compassion for alien life than the Empire's supposedly civilized. Warriors Dr. Parker documented the collapse of Korthak military morale as reports of human atrocities spread through their ranks. The stories grew more terrifying with each telling until enemy soldiers believed that humans were supernatural, demons who could walk through walls and kill with their bare hands. Admiral Blake received surrender offers from entire Korthak star systems whose populations had decided that living under human protection was better than facing destruction. The empire that had ruled through fear was discovering what real terror felt like. High Commander Zach Wren sent increasingly desperate messages to his scattered fleets, but most of his communications were intercepted by human intelligence. Every order was anticipated and countered before enemy forces could act on their instructions. The psychological warfare campaign reached its peak when human forces began broadcasting the locations of Korthak leadership to liberated populations. Angry aliens who had suffered under the Empire's rule provided intelligence and support that made human operations even more effective. Lieutenant Sullivan's bombers destroyed the primary Korthak Naval Academy where future officers were trained. The symbolic impact was devastating because it showed that nowhere in the Empire was safe from Earth's reach. Students and instructors fled in panic as their proudest institution burned. Captain Rogers led the human fleet in a final series of raids that broke the back of Korthak resistance in 3 core systems. Enemy forces that had once inspired terror across the galaxy now huddled in fortified positions and begged for mercy from opponents they no longer understood. Sergeant Garcia found evidence of plans for a final Korthak atrocity, the complete extermination of all prisoners if the Empire faced total defeat. The discovery enraged human forces and convinced them that no mercy could be shown to leaders who would murder helpless civilians, rather than accept honorable surrender. The reports of human savagery reached every corner of Korthak space as the Empire's military machine collapsed under pressure from enemies who refused to fight fair. Worlds that had been loyal for centuries began declaring independence and asking for human protection. Admiral Blake stood on the bridge of the Vengeance watching the tactical display that showed Korthak territory shrinking day by day. The Empire that had terrorized the galaxy for over a millennium was falling apart because they had finally met opponents who understood that sometimes good people had to become monsters to protect the innocent. High Commander Zakren made one final, desperate gamble by ordering his remaining forces to attack Earth itself, but human intelligence had anticipated this move, and Admiral Blake's fleet was already moving to intercept the enemy armada before it could reach humanity's homeworld. High Commander Zakren stood in the ruins of his command center on the Korthak homeworld, watching his empire crumble around him. Human forces had systematically destroyed every major military installation in 3 core systems. The sight of burning cities reminded him of all the worlds his people had devastated over the centuries. Admiral Susan Blake coordinated the final assault on the Korthak capital system from her flagship. The human fleet had grown to over 200 ships as liberated species contributed vessels and crews to the Alliance. What had started as a rescue mission had become a crusade to free the galaxy from tyranny. Captain Jake Morrison led the vanguard as human ships dropped out of hyperspace at multiple points around the enemy homeworld. The deception operation had worked perfectly. Korthak defenders expected the attack to come from the galactic north while the real assault materialized from 3 other directions simultaneously. Colonel Ryan Mitchell's Marines landed on the capital world surface in the largest airborne invasion in human history. They were supported by alien ground forces who had learned human tactics during months of liberation campaigns. Former victims of the Empire now fought alongside their rescuers to end the Korthak threat forever. General Carl Davis personally commanded the ground assault on the capital city where the Empire's leadership had taken refuge. The old soldier had seen many battles on Earth, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of an entire planet dedicated to conquest and cruelty. The Korthak made their final stand in their ancient fortress that had never fallen to enemy attack. High Commander Zakren rallied his remaining warriors with speeches about dying with honor, rather than surrendering to Deathworld savages. His words rang hollow because everyone knew the Empire was already dead. Major Danny Clark led the assault on the fortress gates, while human artillery pounded the massive walls. The ancient stones had withstood bombardment for thousands of years, but they crumbled under weapons designed by species who understood the science of destruction. Sergeant Tony Garcia found the Empire's central prison complex where thousands of alien children were held as slaves. The sight of the tortured youngsters filled every human soldier with cold fury. These were the innocents they had come to protect, and their suffering would be answered with justice. Captain Beth Rogers commanded the space battle above the planet while Korthak ships tried desperately to break through human lines and escape. No enemy vessel would be allowed to flee and spread the Empire's poison to other worlds. The galaxy would finally be free of the Korthak threat. Dr. Amy Parker worked in field hospitals treating wounded from both sides of the conflict. Even in war, humans showed mercy to defeated enemies while the Korthak had shown none to their victims. The contrast was not lost on alien observers who were learning what true civilization looked like. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan's bombers targeted the last Korthak communication arrays that were broadcasting propaganda across the galaxy. The Empire's lies about their invincibility were replaced by transmissions from liberated worlds celebrating their freedom. High Commander Zakren made one final attempt to negotiate a peace treaty that would allow the Korthak leadership to escape justice. He offered to surrender territorial claims and pay reparations in exchange for safe passage to neutral space. The proposal was rejected immediately by human commanders. General Davis entered the fortress throne room, where Zakren waited with his personal guard. The Korthak leader was massive and intimidating, but his defeat was already written in his eyes. The Empire that had conquered hundreds of worlds was ending in the same room where it had planned so many atrocities. Captain Morrison accepted the formal surrender of the Korthak High Command in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. The sight of the defeated tyrants, kneeling before representatives of a species they had considered primitive, became the defining image of the war. Admiral Blake addressed the assembled leaders of liberated worlds from the steps of the former Imperial Palace. Her words were simple but powerful as she announced that the age of conquest and terror was over. The galaxy would be rebuilt on principles of justice and mutual protection. Colonel Mitchell supervised the dismantling of Korthak military installations while alien engineering teams studied captured technology. Weapons designed for oppression would be converted to tools for peaceful development. Under careful human oversight, Dr. Parker established rehabilitation programs for both Korthak civilians and the traumatized populations of liberated worlds. The work of healing would take generations, but humanity's victory had come not just through superior tactics, but through their ability to build something better from the ashes of conflict. Sergeant Garcia led tours of former prison camps for representatives from across the galaxy. The evidence of Korthak atrocities would be preserved as a reminder of what happened when good people failed to act against evil. Never again would the galaxy ignore such suffering. The Galactic Council held an emergency session to discuss the complete transformation of interstellar politics. Human tactics had rewritten the rules of warfare, while their compassion had redefined what it meant to be truly civilized. The species from Earth's death world had proven themselves to be the galaxy's greatest protectors. Captain Rogers commanded the human fleet as it escorted the first Zalani trade vessels back to their homeworld in over a year. The grateful aliens wept at the sight of their recovering cities where life was slowly returning to normal. Children played in streets that had been battlefields just months before. Major Clark established training academies where human instructors taught defensive tactics to species who had never known how to fight back against oppression. The lessons were harsh but necessary because the galaxy had learned that peace could only be maintained by those willing to defend it. Admiral Blake stood on the bridge of the Vengeance watching reconstruction efforts begin across former Korthak territory. Human engineers worked alongside alien scientists to rebuild shattered worlds and create new technologies for peaceful purposes. The partnership that had won the war would also win the peace. High Commander Zach Wren spent his remaining days in a comfortable prison, where he wrote memoirs that would serve as a warning to future tyrants. His empire had fallen because they believed that might made right, and that the weak deserved to suffer. They had learned too late that true strength came from protecting those who could not protect themselves. General Davis retired to a small farm on Earth where he grew vegetables and taught local children about the importance of standing up to bullies. The old soldier had seen enough war for one lifetime, but he remained proud of what humanity had accomplished in the dark spaces between the stars. The galaxy settled into a new age of cooperation and mutual defense guided by principles that humans had carried from their death world. Species that had been enemies learned to work together, while those who threatened the innocent discovered that Earth's children were always watching and always ready to deliver justice to those who deserved it. Years later, when new threats emerged from unknown regions of space, the call went out across the galaxy, and the answer was always the same. Humanity would stand guard against the darkness because protecting innocent life was not just their duty, but their nature. The children of Earth's death world had become the galaxy's greatest hope for a peaceful future, where all species could live free from fear.